the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. Sounds like these witches just can't count to 3 and they're coping hard. From its very first scene, the Acolyte's most glaring flaw, among the many, has been never telling us why the story is happening in the first place. Why is Mae justified murdering the Jedi? Why do the Jedi deserve to die? Without knowing the one critical piece of information, watching the first 2 episodes was like watching the first 2 John Wick movies without seeing the dog die first. To put it simply, we've been following a story without knowing the inciting incident. The event that sparked Mae on her mysterious journey of revenge. Something we wouldn't necessarily need right away had we witnessed the Jedi being evil in the first few episodes. But we don't. Master Yandara and Master Torabin are just minding their own business. So without knowing what evil thing the Jedi did and why Mae wants her revenge, she's just a villain who needs to be stopped. I'm sure some will argue that a story can go for a long time before the inciting incident is revealed. And that's technically true. As much as I hate dragging a masterpiece into the same conversation as this narrative travesty, the legendary epic Lone Wolf and Cub stars Ito Ogami, a master swordsman turned cold assassin. His first few stories involve him killing a number of targets. On the surface, a close parallel to Mae. We don't get the story about how a rival clan framed Ogami as an anti-shogun conspirator, how Ogami was sentenced to death but refused to accept his fate, and how he renounced his former life to walk the path of death and revenge. Not until a few chapters down the line. But here's the difference. We actually don't need to know Ogami's backstory to understand his motivations in these assassinations, because his motivation is just money. You see, unlike Mae, Ogami isn't personally involved with his targets. Sure, the money helps him survive and fund his eventual revenge, but the reason why Ogami wants his target dead in Chapter 1 is purely for cash. And our sympathies usually remain with Ogami, because his targets are usually villainous. And while Ogami can be ruthless, he also maintains a sense of honor and nobility, even in his dishonored status. With Mae, however, she's introduced as a major protagonist. She's the first person we see and the central character from the intro text. She's not particularly clever, and the only nobility she expresses stems from having sympathy for herself, like sparing the bartender for his daughter's sake, or anything having to do with her twin sister, which is kind of a shock if you know where this episode is going. Otherwise, she's attacking innocent people for no clear reason, is pulling dirty tricks to win, and attacking noble Jedi. Episode 1 has Yandara spending the fight protecting innocent people, and Episode 2 gave us Torabin, who has been in a meditative state for over 10 years, unable to hurt anyone at all. Yet, we're supposed to side with Mae because the Jedi totally did something bad. Trust me, bro. In short, because Mae is personally involved with each target, and because each target appears to be a good person, the inciting incident is necessary to inform us why Mae's vengeful crusade is justified. So here we are. We're finally given the reason why we should care about the Acolyte as a series, and it only took 3 episodes to get here. Well, better late than never, right? I mean, no writing team in their right mind would stop the main story, such as it was, to waste an entire episode on a flashback just to forget the question they've been setting up for 2 episodes, right? Episode 3 is by far the most mask-off episode in Disney Star Wars. The bias and the agenda are not only present, but out on full display. These moments are usually done to anger us wicked critics and old-school Star Wars fans, like when they killed off a Jedi Master in the first few minutes of the show, or that time Yor tried to mansplain a perfectly good strategy to capture a dastardly villain, only to have Jackie Lon shoot him down and humiliate the confident Jedi, and did so with a plan that centered around volunteering the innocent civilian for certain death, all for a cheap girl power moment. Just imagine a moment like that, but an entire episode. And just like every other time, these cackling crones fantasize about making us angry. And this time is no less hilarious. We begin 16 years in the past, just before the night of the fateful fire. We meet Osha, who's playing with an alien butterfly thing, noting her as the good twin. And then we're introduced to Mae, who spends the entire episode validating my position from episode 1 and 2 that she is in fact the evil twin. No, not misguided or misunderstood. I mean serial killer levels of evil. Mae tells Osha not to play around with the alien butterfly because it's dangerous. Osha refuses, and Mae's answer to this brazen act of defiance is to choke the butterfly to death. Well, until Osha yells for her to stop. That's where it starts, you know. According to Robert K. Ressler, the FBI profiler who some credit as coining the term serial killer, murderers very often start out by killing and torturing animals as kids. kids. So I guess maybe becoming a ruthless assassin makes sense. We also see exactly why Osha wants to escape her current life as soon as possible, to escape the psychotic tyranny of her sister. Might not seem so bad now, but wait, it gets worse. Much worse. Osha admits the reason she ran off alone is because she has conflicting feelings about participating in the Ascension, which sounds rather Dune-like, but the Acolyte is such a dysfunctional Frankenstein's monster of other better sci-fi media, it could really be from anywhere. Except, of course, Leslie Headland's imagination. So, while they walk back home, Mae tries to manipulate Osha once again by initiating a cringe sisterly rhyme, pressuring Osha into forgiving her. "You are with me, and I am with you," Mae begins. But when Osha refuses to join in, Mae stops in her tracks to put more pressure onto her sister. "I am with you," Mae repeats, urging Osha to accept her place. Finally, Osha just gives in and says, "Always one, but born as two." And then they both say, "As above sits the stars, and below lies the sea. I give you you, and you give me me." Does ChatGPT exist in Star Wars now? Anyway, this is when they're found by Mother Koril, the evil, strict mother who scolds the girls and tells them there will be a punishment for breaking the rules and venturing so far away. And I say, okay, makes sense. So far, I'm on Mother Koril's side. Mother Koril even forbids the girls from having spice cream, which I'm certain only exists because one of the Windhaunt writers thought it was clever and just ran with it. At least I hope that's the reason, and they're not actually selling delicious desserts made from mind-altering drugs to children. Either way, these two kids broke the rules, and kids who break the rules don't get spice cream. That's just ridiculous. Remember that moment from episode 2 when the writers played up Yearns' confidence so they could have a girl power moment when Jackie Lawn shot down his silly man plan with her woman plan? Well, they do it again here, almost the exact same way. Because here comes Mother Aniseya to save the day by openly contradicting the other parent in front of the girls. Fantastic. Kind of underhanded since this makes Koril look like the bad guy. Also, the audience can see Aniseya as the cool progressive mom who lets her kids have drug desserts. Rather fitting the very first time we see this powerful leader of a witch cult, she's manipulating people. "My sweet girls must have sweet treats. Don't you think so, Koril?" Koril being directly chastised for daring to discipline the girls. And Koril says nothing. She just silently agrees with Aniseya's decision. Not only is Koril willing to discipline the girls, she also knows not to publicly throw the other parent under the bus just to score some points with her daughters. Some might ask, how is this a mask-off moment for the agenda? Don't the feminist writers hate men? Well, yes, that is true. But the Disney angry feminist writing style can be boiled down into two things. One, an obsession with power. And two, a hatred for discipline and authority. Specifically, if that discipline goes against their hedonistic desires. So while they do dislike men, and masculine men in particular, there might be one person the modern angry feminist writer hates above all else. A mother figure with expectations. That might be why I Am Not Starfire, for example, had Starfire as an antagonistic force. Mandy, Starfire's more robust daughter, suffers from the pressures of living up to her mother's beautiful image, high expectations for her to meet. While Encanto's Abuela Alma may have saved the lives of everyone in town and created a hidden paradise, but was ultimately made the antagonistic figure because her expectations were too high. Boo-hoo. And who was the antagonistic force in Turning Red? Oh right, the mother. And the grandmother too, actually. And what made them both antagonistic forces? High expectations. Even Brave famously centered around the conflict between Princess Merida and Queen Eleanor. Once again, the mother playing the antagonistic force because of her high expectations for her daughter and eldest child. And these kinds of stories typically end with the wholesome lesson that the daughter should be free to do whatever they like, unshackled by the worries of obligation. They still get all the benefits, of course, just without those pesky obligations and responsibilities. It's a whole era of Western media taken over by a legion of losers sorely in need of therapy. Like they're all mentally stuck in high school. Of course, like any other writing trope, it doesn't always happen, but it does happen. And it seems to also happen here. Mother Koril is the mean mother with high expectations who dares tell them no, while Mother Aniseya is the cool mother the writers wish they had, the one who would allow them to eat desserts and to side with them when they break the rules. So when Mother Koril takes Aniseya aside to disagree with her in private like a good parent, she of course argues for discipline, while Aniseya argues for leniency. Aniseya arguing that the girls shouldn't be punished because breaking the rules is normal for a child, which I'm sure makes sense to a feminist writer writhing in bottles of resentment, but normally, when a normal child breaks the rules, they normally get punished so they can learn, which is the exact argument evil Mother Koril makes. It's really just the arrogant man gets chastised by strong, powerful woman scenario with new paint. It's still, the person in real life I resent gets taken down by my new super cool original character, a mentality that's been fertile ground for countless Mary Sues. Sure, Koril gets the final word, but Aniseya is the leader and so gets the final decision. But remember the two major elements of an angry feminist story: a hatred of discipline and authority, and an obsession with power. We've just seen the aversion to discipline in regards to personal desire, but to an angry feminist writer, power is serious business. Then Aniseya teaches the audience, I mean the girls, about the Force. Except calling it the Force is for posers, since the real name for it is the thread. What's the actual difference? Well, it's never really explained. According to Aniseya,
all living things are connected by the same thread. A thread woven through all of existence.
Which is just a less poetic and much lower IQ description of the Force. To quote Obi-Wan,
"The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together."
So it seems the Acolyte is just copying the original trilogy's homework, except the writing of the Acolyte is so incompetent. The OT came back with an A+, while the Acolyte still came back with an F. Even when stealing from better works, this show can't be bothered to try. And then has the audacity to belittle the core element of Star Wars itself. To quote Aniseya once again,
some call it a force and claim to use it. But we know the thread is not a power you wield. Pull the thread, change everything. It ties you to your destiny.
A poor copy of Obi-Wan's words. However, knowing how angry feminist writers operate, I wouldn't be surprised if the show canonically made Aniseya the originator of the old Jedi's description. After all, another fantasy of the angry feminist is having a man take credit for their work.
I'm not about to let a man take credit for a woman's work.
It allows them to both feel oppressed and valued since their work was worth stealing in the first place. Plus, they get a sense of superiority since the man couldn't think of it on his own. You might think I'm overthinking things now, but just wait until later. The only difference with Aniseya's description is the part about the Force giving the Jedi his power. Aniseya tries to shame the Jedi as slack-jawed tourists in the mystical ways of the universe. Of course it's called the thread and not the Force. No one wields the thread. And then Aniseya proceeds to wield the thread in a fight against two other witches. They're literally using the power of the thread to battle each other, manipulating the thread to make it serve their needs. How is that not classified as wielding it? How the witch's thread philosophy is any different from the Jedi's Force philosophy isn't explored again. The only other difference is the hilarious mantra, the power of one, the power of two, the power of many, implying that the more people involved in using the power, the stronger they are. But even that can't be true because Aniseya wins against two people, so I guess the power of two is not necessarily mightier than the power of one. Seems like the writers were stuck between making their silly philosophy make sense and their inability to allow the stunning and brave Aniseya to lose or be humiliated. Because if two random side witches were able to combine their strength and topple the powerful leader, then their philosophy would at least make some sense, like the more working in unison the stronger the thread pull or something. It would also note that these other witches can dethrone Aniseya anytime, but choose not to out of respect, showing that she earned their allegiance and isn't simply in power because she's the strongest. But then that would make Aniseya seem less powerful. And you know how much angry feminist writers love power. Too bad this story is woke, or it might run the risk of being remotely interesting. Things get more hilarious when Aniseya attacks the twins, commanding they work together to block her. Which, again, would make sense if we had just seen Aniseya lose against two witches. It would set the standard that it can be done. But what makes the scene especially hilarious is that the grown woman is trying to teach her two young daughters about the Force by attacking them. Why? Because this is yet another angry feminist writing trope. Or or at least one they favor, like when a soldier mouthed off to Carter in the first Captain America movie, and she decided the best course of action was to throw him to the ground, or when Galadriel fought a few soldiers of Numenor in Rings of Power, just to show the audience that men are bumbling idiots compared to her. It really seems like feminist writers think they know how men work, but, unsurprisingly, miss the mark. They seem to think that men only respect the strong or powerful, so they make their female characters the strongest ever, which might explain why angry feminists call sexism every time men refuse to watch their Mary Sues. If she were a powerful man, you'd watch. But it isn't your ability to beat up the boys that gets respect from men. It's your ability to overcome obstacles, something these Mary Sues never ever do. They either overcome obstacles easily, or just handed the answer by the plot. Captain America, for example, was a joke until he saved a bunch of soldiers from captivity. In fact, I'd wager that if Disney made a female Jedi who started from the bottom, grew as a character through hard work, and rose to the rank of master on her own merits, the male fan base would love her. You know, instead of just unlocking max level for every female character right from the start. After all, it wasn't Yoda's ability to kill that made him respectable. It was his wisdom earned by many experiences and years of discipline. And if you recall his training with Luke, it involved training Luke's body and mind, exercises, and meditation. Yoda didn't just start attacking Luke with force powers. The one big moment they had like that was lifting Luke's ship from the swamp. A moment where Luke failed and Yoda succeeded, and the only time he ever fought anyone during his training was a battle against an illusory Darth Vader. Traditionally, these training sessions were rarely ever about master battling student, but the student practicing and absorbing the teachers of the master. But no, angry feminist writers love the fight the master training scene. Except whether they be student or teacher, their stand-ins usually win. And where did this tradition come from? Since this story was referenced back in episode 1, and Leslie Headland described the Acolyte as Frozen meets Kill Bill, my best guess is from Kill Bill Volume 2, where the bride fights Pai Mei before he accepts her as a student. First of all, Pai Mei is an evil mentor, so of course, like Carter, like Galadriel, and like Aniseya, Pai Mei needs that moment to crush and humiliate his pupil with his power, gives him a narcissistic rush. Except his narcissism is in his character rather than the writers. And second of all, the battle is to humble the bride and crush her ego, because American women are notoriously egotistical and only good for spending a man's money, which is a stated reason why Pai Mei hates American women most of all. To quote, like all Yankee women, all you can do is order in restaurants and spend a man's money. Pai Mei also knew that the bride would never accept him as her master unless he proved himself superior to her in all things, which of course he did. In short, there's no reason why Aniseya should be fighting the twins. Even if their philosophy made sense and the power of two actually meant something, they should be practicing teamwork, which might sound boring to some, but the show could create some scene tension by highlighting friction between Osha and Mae. You remember, right? The friction they set up right at the beginning. Maybe give us some build-up for what happens later. We can watch them practice. Maybe they succeed well enough on their own, but can't seem to work together, yet they need to cooperate to match Aniseya's goals. Seeing the two girls train by practicing different skills or utilizing the philosophy in some way would have better explored the Coven's perspective, highlight their abilities and the weaknesses, than the now fight me approach. But instead of exploring the Coven's thread ideology and the rift between the twins during a training session, which could have built up to an explosive argument, we get a boring sit-down meeting in a room talking about our feelings. In other words, instead of a scene that follows an arc, which builds the tension until it explodes into a confrontation, we just cut to a calm scene where Aniseya is forcing a confrontation because she senses Osha is troubled. We learn, once again by the way, that Osha doesn't want to go through with the Ascension, which will officially make them witches. Yet we also learn that Mae is resentful towards Osha, who doesn't want to serve the Coven. Noticing her daughters fighting again, Aniseya decides to fix the situation with the most feminist method ever, and just orders them to like each other. Don't try to actually solve the problem, just use your authority to hide the issue and pretend it doesn't exist. Which is pretty brutal for Osha, since as we saw in the beginning, she suffers constant abuse from Mae. In fact, when Osha declared that she doesn't want to be a witch, Mae asserts that she does actually, once again pressuring her sister into compliance. With the issue exposed, Aniseya becomes Osha's one last bastion for freedom, but instead of punishing Mae for her abusive ways, she just pretends there isn't an issue, so she can maintain her gentle, progressive mother status in the eyes of the audience. No wonder Osha wants to run away, and no wonder Mae grows up to be a murderer of innocent Jedi. Incidentally, this is also also the scene where the Coven are confirmed to be witches. When Osha says she doesn't want to go through with the Ascension ceremony, Mae says, "But that's how we become witches." So no, calling them witches isn't an insult or an unfair demonization of the characters. It's what the show literally calls them. Then we cut to some witches staring at a hole. Anyway, we cut to a scene where the twins are getting ready for the Ascension, which does two things. The first is to remind us that there's fiction between Osha and Mae, which was the whole point of the previous scene. And second, to remind us that spice cream exists. How many spice creams are you going to eat? I think I'll eat at least 4. I was willing to let the spice cream thing go as some silly thing the writers thought up, but they mention it again. First, it was the girls asking Koril for spice cream, and then talking about spice cream is literally the very first line spoken by Aniseya, and now we have a whole scene just to mention it again. If I didn't know the show's writing was so incompetent that it seems closer to corporate sabotage, I'd say the spice creams were a setup. Ironically, it's called the Rule of 3. You know, the number the witches can't count to. When something is mentioned 3 times in a story, it's typically significant to the story. And if you remember our Chekhov's gun discussion from the previous episode, then according to narrative theory, spice cream would be a setup for something. Or else why mention it so often? If a gun is present in Act 1, then it should be shot by Act 2 or 3. And if it isn't going to be used, then it shouldn't be hanging there at all. Hearing spice cream muttered yet again makes me think Aniseya really is giving the girls desserts laced with mind-altering drugs for some nefarious scheme. But wait, it gets worse. The witches go through with the Ascension, and I know Leslie Headland's coven back home might find the stage choreography of a first-year art student and the crazy cackle of a stoner charming in their rituals, but to us it's just cringe. And wait, it gets worse. Once again, woke writing rears its ugly head when Mother Aniseya gives her speech. To quote, "Tonight we enact a ceremony we have not performed since our exile. We were hunted, persecuted, forced into hiding, all because some would consider our power dark, unnatural. We were on the brink of extinction, and then we were blessed with the miracle. The miracle of today's sponsor. Legendary artist of Green Lantern Rebirth, Flash Rebirth, and the creator of Cyberfrog, Ethan Van Sciver, now brings you Rainbow the Brute, the last real man in fairyland. Inspired by the eye-rolling modern trend of making franchises meant for men and changing them to appeal more towards women instead, Rainbow the Brute makes stories and cute mythical creatures made for girls and remakes them for men. Currently, the highly articulated Rainbow the Brute action figure is funding on Indiegogo with a long road of stretch goals to unlock. So far, it's unlocked an additional arsenal of parts and pieces, so the mighty Brute has everything he needs to blast his way through a horde of unicorns and really annoying Care Bear things, like the recently unlocked Rainbow Gatling gun. There's even a set of variants to choose from, including Black Rain and the blood-splattered Brute. And at this point, some might be thinking this would make an interesting comic. Well, worry not, because Ethan Van Sciver's Rainbow the Brute also has its own comic pumped with brutal action. Turns out Rainbow's son has been raised by the mother the entire time and has no idea how to be a man. Now it's up to the Brute to teach his feminized boy how to be masculine by taking him through a trek of testosterone-fueled adventures, leaving behind a river of blood and sugar. So get yourself a highly articulated Rainbow the Brute action figure and a copy of his upcoming comic today, and get ready to chokeslam a unicorn. Now, on with the video. There's a bit to break down here. First, one of the Acolyte's main goals is to demonize the Jedi. To quote the gamer, the Acolyte is interesting because it challenges the idea of heroes and villains. Episode 7, Choice, highlights how the show has been saying throughout the entire first season that Jedi are not the good guys. They just think they are. They think the Jedi Code protects them from doing harm. It doesn't. The backbone of woke writing is its victim complex. So of course, the woke ideology running the story sets the witches as a poor, oppressed people who just want to live in peace, while the Jedi are oppressors who can't stand strong, rebellious women. And we know it's the Jedi they hate because Koril and Aniseya talked about them earlier. And later it becomes obvious that the angry witches and the Jedi share a mutual hostility against each other. So they've been exiled, persecuted, left alone with no defense, and when they think of what those brutes did, they get a little tense. Like Zira's villain song from The Lion King 2. Woke writers will just write speeches like this and automatically assume you'd side with the oppressed, hoping you'd forget that evil is often persecuted by good. Some might ask, how do we know they're evil? Maybe they're just misunderstood. Well, that's certainly the story Aniseya goes with. But even in her speech, the story doesn't quite make sense in the Star Wars universe. We were hunted, persecuted, forced into hiding, all because some would consider our power dark, unnatural. I know the writers might feel empowered, making their precious stand-ins out to be these rebels with power men fear. But as we saw earlier, the Coven's philosophy is just the Force, except they call it the Thread. It even seems to operate the same way. So the big question is, in a galaxy where the Jedi not only exist, but are respected as guardians of the Republic, how can these witches be considered unnatural? Well, there is one other reason, which is even worse, but we'll get to that in a moment. Osha and Mae go through the ritual, and we're shown yet again that Osha doesn't really want to be there, but she's once again pressured into participating. This is when the mysterious Jedi show up, and it's Indara, Sol, Torben, and Kelnaka. The same 4 Jedi Mae hunts down in the present, which means we finally reach the meat of the episode. Finally exploring what the Jedi did and why Mae would eventually seek revenge. At least you would think that's where we're going. There's immediate friction between the witches and the Jedi. Turns out witches aren't allowed to train children according to Republic law. Long story short, the Jedi are here for the twins. Not only did the Jedi know about the girl, but Sol was following them around like a creep earlier. Considering that a lot of woke feminist stories just feel like barely disguised therapy sessions, it really does feel like Aniseya's mother just walked in and found weed at the slumber party. So the twins are discovered, and the writers get another empowering moment when their mother, Indara, asks who the father is. And Aniseya smugly says, they have no father. I don't have a dealer. I grow my own weed, Mom. And yes, this is another woke feminist writing trope. They really like the idea of procreating without men, like how Marvel's America Chavez has 2 moms. And asexual reproduction was a big part of Steven Universe for some reason. And because evil cannot create and can only corrupt what good forces have made, we come to the second possible reason why some deem Aniseya's power to be unnatural. The Acolyte just rips off the story of Darth Plagueis from Revenge of the Sith. As Palpatine explains, Darth Plagueis was a Dark Lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midichlorians to create life. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities, some consider to be unnatural. Turns out the twins are Plagueis-style Force babies. Aniseya created them and Koril carried them. Remember when I mentioned not being surprised if the Acolyte's writers claimed Obi-Wan Kenobi canonically stole his description of the Force from Aniseya? Well, canonically, Plagueis is no longer the wise genius who discovered the mysteries of life. Now he's just the guy who copied Aniseya's genius, aka another man who took credit for a woman's work. I told you they loved that trope.
I'm not about to let a man take credit for a woman's work.
The writers even stole the unnatural description from Palpatine, strongly hinting that the witches are dark side users. The full quote by Palpatine, who is a Sith Lord and a proud dark side user, goes, "The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural." So according to Star Wars lore, they are evil, and their following actions don't help their case at all. Once again, the Jedi are portrayed as respectful, yet the witches are ready to kill them on the spot. Remember, the witches aren't allowed to train children, by law. Even if they're no longer in the jurisdiction of the Republic, there's a reason that law exists. But just because the Jedi see the dark side as evil doesn't mean it is. The witches are misunderstood, not evil. Well, in Star Wars, the dark side has always been evil. In fact, that's what the Revenge of the Sith is all about. The dark side is supposed to be attractive, tantalizing, tempting. The story of the prequels is a story of Anakin Skywalker growing up as a noble hero and then encountering Palpatine, who reframes the dark side as misunderstood or blindly demonized by the Jedi. This way, the prospect of delving into the dark side to save Padme wouldn't be as unforgivable as he once thought. The villain is supposed to soften evil, so the hero will fall into the trap. And Anakin fell for it. He found the dark side too tempting to turn away and became corrupted and evil. The witches are doing the same here, except the writers want the audience to fall into the trap. Villains don't often see themselves as villains. Even the worst have a roster of reasons why what they're doing is okay. Even if I were to wipe away decades of Star Wars lore, most of the movies, and the core message of the originals from my consideration, and I become open to the idea that the witches are simply misunderstood victims victims and the Jedi are actually evil, this all comes crumbling down the moment Aniseya starts ravaging the mind of the innocent Jedi Padawan. Remember, the Jedi haven't taken a single hostile action to harm any member of the Coven. All Indara has done is suggest the twins take a test to see if they're force sensitive enough to become Jedi. Sure, should they pass, they'd be taken, but at present, there's nothing that calls for this level of escalation. Yet Aniseya responds by assaulting Torben's mind with dark force powers. Not really something a good guy would do. And Aniseya declares that she will release this innocent young Padawan if the Jedi leave. At this point, the Jedi have every right to start defending themselves. In D&D terms, it's time to roll initiative. Aniseya starts ravaging the mind of poor Torben, who has done absolutely nothing wrong. And I'm supposed to side with the witches? Osha declares that she actually wants to take the test, and the witches let Torben go. The witches meet in secret to discuss how their force-sensitive girls can pass a force-sensitive test. That's when an old crone steps in with an idea. What if the girls purposefully fail the test? Mae goes in first and fails successfully. Oh, and while Mae takes a test, Osha watches Kelnaka repair his vehicle, hinting that this is what inspires Osha to enter STEM. After all, it wouldn't be an angry feminist Star Wars without a female main character who loves the science. Or in this case, engineering. Something they think is still new and unexpected. But at this point, it's actually so mainstream that if Star Wars made an ordinary girl who was a domestic goddess and pined for a handsome Jedi, it would be downright avant-garde. I also wanted to point out Kelnaka's hilarious hairstyle. I'm guessing they gave him a bald head to make him look more like a samurai. But as far as I know, the samurai shave their heads so it would be easier to wear a helmet. The Jedi don't do that. So this fancy bald look on a Wookiee just makes it seem like he lost a bet. Anyway, Osha tries to fail the test, but Sol catches on and tells her about the Jedi. Osha tells Mae, Koril, and Aniseya that she doesn't want to share her life with Mae. She wants to see the galaxy. Classic Disney princess syndrome. She doesn't want to be a witch. Mae, of course, starts attacking Osha. Koril and Aniseya let Mae attack Osha for a few seconds before Koril takes Mae away. Remember, Aniseya is the cool progressive mom. Can't have her saying no or being strict unless she's teaching them how to attain power. So she tells Osha it's her choice, taking the opportunity to bash the Jedi and promote her cringy philosophy again. Destiny is not decided for you by an anonymous force. You get to make the choice, Osha. If you want to pull the thread, then pull it. So Osha packs her things and readies to leave, but then her psychotic sister steps in to stop her. Mae pushes Osha to the ground, locks her in the room, and sets the room on fire, hoping to burn Osha alive. But the Jedi are the bad guys? Okay. Luckily, Osha is able to escape since she absorbs some STEM skill points from Kelnaka, and she magically engineers her way out. The sisters meet up again on a collapsing bridge. Mae falls while Osha is rescued by Sol. And this is where Sol explains that Mae's fire burned down the mountain. See, it's writing like this that gets you the big bucks. But here's the real big brain 4D chess move. This entire episode was a huge waste of time. Let's recap. What did the episode actually tell us? 1. That Mae and Osha are twins, that they're force sensitive, that they had 2 mothers, that they were all part of a witch coven, there's hostility between the witches and the Jedi, Mae is a psycho, Osha is the good twin, there was a fire that killed everyone, Indara, Torben, Sol, and Kelnaka were all there, they might have killed Mae and Osha's parents, hence Mae's revenge plot, and Osha joined the Jedi to become Sol's Padawan. Almost every point of information in this episode has already been given to us by the previous episodes. Episode 1's ghost magic told us Osha and Mae were twins. The first few minutes of the series told us that Mae is a vindictive assassin with force powers who'll murder anyone who gets in her way. And she works for a Sith Lord. We see Osha save a man's life in episode 1. Sol vouches for her, and he tells us all about the fire and how the twins lost everything, including their 2 mothers. And the only reason Sol is involved is because they tell us Osha used to be his student. And by the end of episode 2, Indara and Torben are dead because they were at the fire. Osha confirms that Sol was there too, and the second episode's cliffhanger showed us Kelnaka, Mae's final target. In summary, the only new things we learned from the episode are that Osha and Mae's mothers were evil witches, and technically the thread philosophy, which is just a force except you replace the word force Force with the word thread. And we already knew the Jedi were the enemy since Mae is trying to hunt them down for killing her family, which is the exact detail we needed to even determine if the story made sense. Episode 3 had one job: to show us what crime the Jedi committed. This way we can finally understand if Mae's revenge is justified or misguided. Are the Jedi truly guilty? Whatever the Jedi did must have been terrible if Torben took the poison as penance. But that's the one thing we don't get. The Jedi appear, show respect to the witches, Torben gets his mind ravaged by the witches, they test the girls, send them back without incident, and saved Osha. We're not exactly dealing with the Gestapo here. If anything, the episode showed us that the Jedi were not only the kind and noble warriors we expected them to be, but also that the witches are fairly evil, and the Jedi knew they were negotiating with a coven of darkside users while they were trying to save 2 innocent girls from corruption. Not to mention, the episode just majorly reinforced how psychotically evil Mae is when she tried to burn her sister alive. She's not misunderstood or misguided. She's evil. Osha was oppressed by an evil cult and abused by a wicked twin sister. But no, the Jedi are evil. Sure, Jan. In short, the entire episode was nearly 40 minutes of old information we've already been given, and it failed to give us the one thing we needed: the Jedi's crime. So here's the big challenge of the day. Can we fix this? But here's the neat thing. Other than suggestions I've already made, we don't. It's not perfect by any means, and they need to put in a lot more work into what makes the thread philosophy different from the Force. But the best major fix for episode 3 would just be to make it episode 1. Despite its glaring flaws, episode 3 does give us a lot of essential information about the story. We learn everything here that were given in the show's real first 2 episodes, with one distinct advantage: we're shown, not told. Episode 1 and 2 mainly give us this information through dialogue. Episode 3 shows us how Osha and Mae grew up, that they were part of a witch coven and trained in the Force/thread. We're also introduced to several major characters, and we see the events of the fire. Well, most of them. And the stage would be set for the episodes that followed. Destiny stops the main story to rehash old information. At best, even if it showed us the Jedi's crimes, the episode would still mostly be old information. But as a first episode, it would give the audience something to reference as we see events play out, mysteries unfold, and characters develop. Destiny had one objective as an episode: to finally tell us what the Jedi did and exactly why we should care. But unfortunately, it seems the Acolyte's 3rd episode catastrophically failed to do its job, just as Leslie Headland failed to do hers.